Hey guys, Shaye Elliott from the blog The Elliott Homestead, and due to popular demand, I have to take you guys through my root cellar. We have been working so hard in the gardens and on the farm to fill our root cellar with all of this food for seasonal eating going into winter. And this is kind of the time of year where we get to celebrate all of that work because you see things start to pile up in the larder. And I know this might not be exciting for everybody, but if you're growing some of your food, I'm sure this is really exciting for you. We get lots of specific questions about what we grow and how we store it and what we stock up on. So I'm going to try to do my best in this video to walk you through our root cellar, show you what we keep down here and how we store it, and hopefully that'll help you as you begin storing food yourself for eating in winter. So this big rack we keep for our extra food storage. And no, I don't make everything from scratch, which is why a lot of this stuff is here. I store up on bulk items from Azure, things like dried beans and some dried fruits that we don't grow here ourselves. Like you have some extra garlic up here, some rice, steel cut oats, and that kind of a thing. I also keep jovial boxed pasta on hand for days that I don't want to be bothered to make pasta. So that's kind of my top shelf there, some of those dried goods. We get asked about pests a lot, and yes, we do battle pests. So one of the reasons I keep them up on the top shelf is to keep mice away. You'll notice that these are all smaller bags, but if I'm buying like a 25 or 50 pound bag of something, I put it in Ziploc bags and either store it in the freezer or store it in the cold room because the little, what are they called? The little weevils, you know, those kinds of things, those will get into them. So these are all freshly sealed bags. Once they're open, they'll be stored in the cold room. This next shelf down here is kind of our tea and condiment shelf. We also have some homemade vinegars going here. So you can see we have a plum vinegar, an apple vinegar, and then there's a pear vinegar behind it. And if you've never made homemade vinegar before, you really should give it a try because all you need to do is fill a glass jar with some kind of fruit, and it could just be the cores and peelings of whatever fruit you want to make. Top it off with water, add a couple of tablespoons of a live vinegar. Bragg's is a really popular one that you can get at the grocery store that's live. And then add in a little bit of sugar or honey, and that's it. Then you just have to let it sit for about 6 weeks, and at the end, you'll have vinegar. And you can see mine are covered with just kind of this cheesecloth material, and the fruit flies really like it. But so long as they can't get inside, it won't bother it at all. Homemade teas is another thing that we stock up on throughout the spring and summer. So I keep this little section here for tea. This is some of our homegrown honey from our bees. And then this is just that gorgeous tea that we actually made together on a YouTube video a couple of months ago. So this has chamomile and mint and rose petals and bee balm and raspberry leaves. And I know I'm forgetting other stuff. But this is a great tea to have on hand for winter. Next to the tea section, we have our flavored salts, which is also something that we made together on a YouTube video. I'll be sure to tag it below in the notes. This is just a reminder that I have them here and that I should cook with them. So I've got a tarragon salt, a green garlic salt, and some of that really yummy Tuscan herb salt that we made. Below that is just a hodgepodge of baking things, different spices and extra baking powders and mulling spices and dried seaweed, extra peanut butter because I love peanut butter. Some really fancy natural suckers that we got accidentally in our Azure order last month, and just a few baking supplies like that. If we go down a little further, apparently I was having a rough time the last time I did my Azure order because I stocked up on all kinds of crackers and cookies from Jovial, which is fine. These are great to have on hand for school days when we can't really stop to make something from scratch. And then of course, just extra olive oils, extra vinegars, ketchup, that kind of stuff. And then the bottom shelf is just for my ready-made Jovial beans that I keep on hand because I love them and I don't always want to soak my beans. Next to the shelf is something I'm really excited to show you because I've been giving this effort for about 4 years and I think this is the first time I have something to show for it. So let's check out my cheese cave. All right, this is a little wine fridge that we got a couple of years ago. And this is where I keep my cheese. Now, I made myself a promise with cheese making this year, and that's that I wasn't gonna get crazy, I wasn't gonna try anything super fancy, and I wasn't gonna try anything that couldn't be waxed. We live in a really hard environment for cheeses because it's so dry here. So we're constantly having to add humidity. And there are definitely ways that you can do that with a homemade cheese cave. But until my kids are grown and I can give it the attention it deserves, I just simply waste my time making the cheeses and then not tending to them like I need to, not giving them the attention that they deserve. So all the cheese I put up this year are waxed for that reason. You'll also notice that I made fairly big blocks of cheese, and that's to help them keep some of their moisture, because the smaller the cheese, the faster it'll lose moisture. So when you make them a little bit bigger, they have a greater chance of turning out. So these are just different pepper jack. This is a pepper jack that will be ready to eat in just a couple of months' time. Again, with the Ziploc, I keep the cheeses in here so that it helps the cheese to retain as much moisture as possible. I leave them open so there's enough ventilation that nothing gets moldy or gooey. And every week I just have to come down here and flip the cheeses over. Most of them we won't be able to eat until December or January, which is hard to wait, but also think about how good that's going to taste. And this is preserved from late spring, early summer milk, which is when the grass is greenest, the cow has just calved, and so her milk is just flowing like crazy. And it's the perfect time for us to be making cheese because there is a lot of milk. Now you can make cheeses with winter milks, but I mean, winter milk, it's just not the same as spring and summer milk. And so this is a time of year to really stock up the cheese cave and then spend the winter just enjoying it and using your milk for other stuff. All right, let's talk about the shelving behind me for a few minutes. So on this shelf is just where we keep all of our supplies. When you're cooking a lot of food from scratch and when you're eating seasonally, you're gonna use a lot of supplies, especially if you're putting up food from your farm. So canning supplies, cheese making supplies, butchering supplies, got a little coffee section here, extra baking supplies, napkins, Tupperware, juicers, all that kind of stuff. It all needs a home. Don't want it to live in my kitchen. I try to keep my kitchen really pared down to what I use every single day. So that's where all of this stuff lives. I try to keep it organized in these big plastic tubs that we use a lot when we butcher, because that way they get stored and it helps to organize stuff. This cabinet is a little bit more exciting. Oh, okay, besides the stock pots and stuff, I know that that's not exciting. But this is where we have stored all of our dried fruit. Now, I know this doesn't look like very much, but if you've ever dried fruit, you know how much effort goes into every single one of these jars. So this year we did dried apricots, dried cherries, dried pears, dried blueberries, and dried apples are still on the list, but we haven't done those quite yet. We also have our little home apothecary area down here. So this is that Outlander herbal salve. I didn't show you guys this. I'll leave a link down below to the post on my blog, but this is made with fresh herbs and flowers from the garden, and it's kind of a medicinal salve that you can use on rashes or bug bites, that kind of stuff. Below that is some echinacea tincture, the 2020 vintage. The 2019 or 18 vintage is behind it, so this one won't be ready for about 6 months. But that's just echinacea flower covered in vodka and allowed to steep down here for about 6 months. And then of course, a nice spicy jar of fire cider. That won't be ready for another couple months as well. If you've never made fire cider, it's a really easy recipe to add to your repertoire and a really nice kind of backup to have in your home apothecary for when you need to kick a sickness really quickly. That one's gonna be a spicy one because we grew a lot of jalapenos this year. So that's kind of an exciting shelf for me. And then below that, we have this year's shallot harvest and the remnants of last year's shallot harvest that we didn't use. But instead of wasting them, we'll just add them by the handful into our broths and stocks all winter long, and that way they still get used and we can use the really fresh shallots for putting on salads, that kind of thing. All right, next room. So this is the second little room in our root cellar. and this is where I keep my jams and jellies. You'll notice that I don't actually put up that much canned food, mostly because it's a ton of work and I like to ferment things and keep them in the cold room instead. But there are a few things that I will make an exception for. And what I like about having everything out like this is I don't have to make everything every single year. So I made a ton of pepper jelly a couple of years ago and we're still eating on it, so there was no need to make that this year. A few canned peaches at my kids' request, but most of this is just jams and jellies. I'll make sure to link that below because we did make a honey sweetened jam recipe together a couple of months ago here on the channel. And I gotta work and talk at the same time because this is some really fabulous pear butter that we made a couple of days ago that I've been meaning to bring down here. Really, this room just holds these jams and jellies other than the grow rack that's behind me. So this is where I keep my seedlings in the spring. And so this won't see much action for a few more months, but it's here waiting at the ready when we need it. This is a great place for me to have them because I can really keep a close eye on them because I'm down here so many times a day. Okay, now I'm gonna show you probably the most exciting part for me as the farmer, because I'm gonna show you our cold room. This is the fullest that it will ever be throughout the year. Almost every single crop has come in from the fields other than our potato harvest. So this is really its peak moment. Ta-da! Probably looks a little different than the last time you saw it when we were just putting these shelves in. But here she is in all her glory. Let's just start left to right and cruise through this thing because I don't want to miss any of this goodness that we're going to show you. Shall we start with the flavored gins? This was a project I was really excited about this year. I had no recipe for it. Everything I saw online just used a ton of sugar, so I kind of just made it up and went for it. But gin is my drink of choice, and we had all this gorgeous fruit, and I thought, what would happen if we just filled the jars full of fruit, topped them off with gin, added a little honey, and then let it ferment for about a month? And that's exactly what we did. So my pear gin, as you can see, is still fermenting. The rest of the gins have already been strained from the fruit and then bottled with these little grommet bottles that I just love with a little label because of course I'll forget, and I am saving these for winter, especially for Christmas. Like that's when we'll break them out. We've got a blackberry gin, a raspberry gin, a pear gin, and a blackberry raspberry gin. Sounds like I didn't have enough fruit. So these are happily storing away there. This was another really exciting one that we made this year, and this is a currant cordial. So our currant bush is finally big enough to give us a big crop of beautiful red berries. And so we simply mashed up the fruit with a bunch of honey and some spices and some water, and here it is. So that one will be good. Again, not quite time yet. Another big one we stocked up on this year was elderberry syrup. We just made this a couple of weeks ago. Again, honey, elderberries, water. I put On Guard essential oil in mine. And there it is, ready for the taking. You'll probably notice all the bins around me, and I can't even tell you exactly what's in every single one. I know we have 4 lugs of beets, which I think are over here. We've got 6 lugs of carrots, which are over here somewhere. And if you've missed our video on how we store those through the winter, I'll tag that below as well. You can see they're actually buried in dirt. This beet was harvested in June, and look it's still solid as a rock. It's perfect. They just have to stay nice and buried in that dirt. This was also the year of the pear for us because we were able to get an entire bin of Bartlett pears from a local farm. And so what we haven't turned into pear sauce or pear butter or dried pears or pear gin or pear wine has been just stored in here. So pears are picked unripe from the tree, and they'll stay that way until you sort of expose them to the right environment. So as long as these stay in here, they're going to ripen really slowly, and we should be able to eat on them well into late autumn. This bottom shelf here is where I keep all of my flowers. So remember I was telling you if I buy something big and in bulk, I put it in Ziplocs and store it in the cold room. Well, that's what this flour is. So I've got my regular flour, my einkorn flour, and so my baking supplies kind of live here on this bottom shelf. Right above that is my beautiful cabbage from this year's harvest. And these heads, just like this, just cut off and stuck in the cold room, will last all the way through next cabbage harvest. They'll start to look a little worse for the wear, but as long as you just take the outside leaves off, the inside will be totally fine. So this is a great way to have fresh veg all winter long. And this is a Copenhagen market cabbage, which is bred for storage. So make sure you get a storage cabbage if you want to do this in yours. I know it sounds like I'm making a lot of boozy drinks, but they're all just consolidated here in the cold room. This is an elderflower cordial that we made in the spring. So before the elderberries are formed, you have these gorgeous little white flower clusters that you can take, mix with lemon and honey and water and alcohol if you choose to, and make this yummy cordial. It tastes super light. It tastes like spring. I mean, plus the alcohol preserves it. So, you know, it all makes sense. Moving to this side of the cold room, this is where we keep all of our ferments and vegetables, which you can see here. So this is my fermented salsa. Again, this will keep all year long, though it never does because we'll eat it. Here are those gorgeous pack oil tomatoes that we made together a couple of weeks ago. That's all that there. These ones are just some sun-dried ones. So before I packed them in oil, I dehydrated them a little bit. That's all salsa. All salsa. There's some lard, a couple different types of roasted tomatoes. Then we get down into pickle territory, which is good territory. So here are those barrel pickles that, again, we made together. We've made a lot together this year, haven't we? So some of them I keep in glass jars. I also have 3 or 4 or 5 crocks full of pickles kind of surrounding the floor of the cold room. So they're around. Here's a roasted tomatillo salsa, also fermented, and then some green beans. Actually, those are yellow green beans that are preserved in vinegar, and I just love the sharpness of the vinegar. So those ones aren't fermented. More tomatoes back there, and of course, sauerkraut, the king of preserving vegetables. So this, we decided to do all of our purple cabbage this year as sauerkraut and make it extra spicy just for fun. So there's some chilies in all of them, but this, and it just looks pretty. It looks so pretty. So when you come down in winter and it's white and it's gray and horrible and soggy outside and you see a bright purple spicy cabbage, you just want to eat it. All the way to my left is those bins of carrots and beets and pears that I talked about. But there is one other exciting thing that I want to show you. A lot of you joined me on my Instagram stories a couple of weeks ago when I was showing you butchering our ducks and how we kind of follow through the culinary process of that throughout the day. Well, here is the final result of our duck confit. So we ended up with 5 containers, and each of them has, how many, like 7 sets, I think, like a leg and thigh. Does that sound about right? So you can see they're completely submerged in the fat here. You can kind of see sections of them there, although I just tore some of it off when I opened it. But what you can do is just take this out, bring it to room temperature, scoop out your already cooked leg and thigh, and just enjoy it whenever you want some delicious meat. If I had to choose a very favorite meat in the entire world, it would probably be duck confit, especially homemade. So this is a fun one. This is like the gold of our refrigerator. This is what everybody wants. I know this can be a little overwhelming or a little exciting depending on where you're at, but let me simplify it for you with one question. What do you want to eat? If you don't want to eat duck confit, it would make no sense for you to put some up in your cold room. So think about that and explore it and have fun with it, because after all, this is your food storage. This is my food storage, and it should be reflective of the cook and of the people that are going to eat of it. So now is the time to completely celebrate that. So break out your raspberry gin, Slice open your cheese and enjoy it because all that hard work is finally going to pay off.